farm in eastern North Carolina. And I was the youngest of 6 children that lived. I was the only child born in a hospital, and I was the sickest child out of 6. But God had a purpose. God had a reason. I guess if I had to use any word from my life up until now, the main word that I probably, or 2 words, would be fear and rejection. I was born with an eye condition that it's very rare. My eyes do not sit still. They just go every which way. And so at some point when I was growing up, of course I got made fun of a lot in school, had really thick Coke bottle glasses and the whole thing. And I would come home crying, and at some point my mom told me one day, she said, you don't have anything to cry about because God has given you something special. And I couldn't figure out what was special because everybody else thought it was funny. And her words to me were, God gave you dancing eyes, and he didn't give them to anybody else. So that kind of stuck in my mind for years and years afterwards. But home life wasn't great. I grew up with an alcoholic brother, and he was very, very, very mean when he was drinking. And we learned really, really quickly to run and hide. The word fear, I grew to learn that word very fast and very young. He was probably the best person in the world when he was sober. Would do anything for you, had a heart of gold, and he was probably my favorite sibling of all of them. But he struck fear into our hearts. And it was just by many, many miracles of God that I'm even here today. Well, I thought, God, why are you allowing this to go on? Well, then my mom became an alcoholic. And my mom is the one that taught me about Jesus. And I couldn't understand because I gave my heart and my life to Jesus when I was 12 and I got baptized. And I thought, wow, things will get better. Seemed that they got worse. And my mom just got worse and she got worse. And you didn't recognize her when she was drunk. She was a totally, totally different person, like a split personality. And I learned very quickly, I learned very, very quickly to be the peacemaker. Because being the youngest, I was the last one to leave home. And I learned quickly to do everything I could to make sure that the water stayed calm, so to speak. And I think about it all these years later, I think about how many times, because my mama was mean too. She was mean when she was drunk. And I think how many times God just spared my life. And I thought, Lord, people don't understand what brokenness is. They don't understand what it's like to have to run and hide and to be scared and to be embarrassed because you couldn't bring friends home from school. You couldn't have someone come and stay with you like the other kids did. And so I adjusted to it. I got used to it. And when I was 17, I met my first husband. And you know, I convinced myself and I convinced my family that I was in love. He was 7.5 years older than me and probably the sweetest little thing in the world at the time. And I thought, wow, you know, God, this must be you. This is a blessing. When all I really wanted was out. I wanted away. I wanted out. Well, we got married when I was 17. And first, we were together 2.5 years. The first 5 were good. The last 5 were a nightmare. He turned into someone that I didn't know. He became very abusive. And it started out as just mental abuse. You're not good enough. You can't do this good enough. You can't talk good enough. You can't be in public. You're an embarrassment to me. You can't cook good enough. You can't clean house good enough. There's nothing that you can do that's going to please me, so don't try. But then if I didn't try, it's why aren't you trying? Why are you giving up? And then it became isolation. It became keeping me away from friends and family. Then it became to a point of just escalating into just all kinds of abuse, all kinds of just horrible, horrible things that it would take all night to explain, which I won't. But brokenness, again, brokenness, fear, rejection. And I thought, Lord, why? You know, I got away from all of these things when I was growing up. Why, Lord, am I back in the middle of something worse? And I couldn't understand. I still love God with all my heart. I still went to church. I still worshiped Him in the best way I could. But I even got made fun of with that because I would go home from church and He would tell me how foolish I was. And how if I raised my hands, people were looking at me and they were laughing behind my back. And how if I raised my voice and said amen or praise you, Jesus, in church, that people were making fun of me. And it got to a point that I was scared to even open my mouth. And I would go to church and people would look at me like, what's going on with you? You know, you're not yourself. And you know, it's a shame to say, but I learned how to lie. And one of the things that really shames me the most is that I stood in God's house and told lies. And I would say, oh, I'm okay, just having a bad day. Nothing's going on, everything's cool, you know. And then I would go home and when I was by myself and I would cry. And I would say, Father, please forgive me. Because I don't want anybody to know. I don't want anybody to know. And it really got to a point that I just wanted out. I wanted away. I was the only child in my family that was not divorced, and I didn't believe in it. I couldn't bring myself to wrap my head around that thought. And my family began to notice things. My friends began to notice things. And they kept telling me, you need to get out or you're going to die. And I could, no, he wouldn't do that. No, he wouldn't. He wouldn't do that to me. Well, and I guess this is really hard to share with you guys because Joe knows the story, but there's people in my family that don't even know some of the stuff that I'm sharing with you tonight. Because the shame was too great and the burden was too great and I wouldn't place it on my family. But to be in a position where one moment you're being told you're not good enough, you're not sexy enough, you're not gorgeous enough, you're not whatever enough, to be woken up in the middle of the night and assaulted and thrown on the floor and spit upon, everything but hitting, okay? Everything but. And being told, you're mine, you're my possession, and I will do with you as I wish. And something hit me that night. I was laying on the floor, and it was like 2 in the morning. And I just could just feel so broken. And I kept saying, Father, please, if this is not your will for me, then you have to open the door. Because I can't do it anymore. I can't. There's a thin line between love and hate. And I remember getting up off the floor and walking into the kitchen. And I picked up the biggest butcher knife I could find. I walked back into the bedroom. And he laughed at me. And he says, what are you doing? I said, touch me again and you die. And I was very serious. I was very, very serious. And he looked at me and he laughed and he started toward me and I took the knife and held it out and word of it. And he kind of backed off a little bit. So I took the knife and I put it up under my pillow. Well, needless to say, for the last couple of months that I was there, that's where the knife stayed. And he knew I meant it. But I had to pray very, very hard because I was very, very scared. And I was very just anxious all the time. And my nerves were shot. And I was still trying to go to church. And I was still trying to serve God. And I was still waiting for God's answer. Well, in the process of all this, I lost my mother. And I remember my mama's words to me before she had actually given her life back to the Lord. She had started going to church. She had quit drinking. And I remember her words to me, God doesn't expect you to live this way. And God will bring my baby out. I promise you. Well, 3 months after my mama died, God opened the door. And I knew it was him because there was no other way, no other possible circumstance that could have happened except that he did it. Well, I wound up an hour away from home in Raleigh, North Carolina at a program for visually impaired and legally blind. And, of course, my nerves were so bad, I was in such bad shape, my roommates told on me. And the psychologist and all we had to talk to once a week at the workshop advised me that I needed to be on medication. I didn't want to do that because my husband before had made me take medicine when I didn't need it to keep me where he wanted me. If I was taking the medicine, whether I wanted it or not, I was calm and he could control. And I explained that to them and I'm like, you know, I don't want to do this. And they're like, but you need it. And we promise you, you're going to be okay. So needless to say, I went back to the boarding house that night. And here comes brokenness again. I had asked God to make a way. And I had asked God to open the door. And God had honored that wish. But I remember standing in the bathroom and I took a whole bottle of nerve pills, poured them in my hand, and got them just about this close to my mouth. And it was just as if God slapped them out of my hand. They went all over the bathroom floor. I fell on the floor screaming and crying. And it was just so awesome that in the process of that, God reminded me of a scripture. And the scripture is Jeremiah 29, 11 and 12. And it says, for I know the thoughts that I think toward you, saith the Lord, thoughts of peace and not of evil, to give you an expected end. Then shall ye call upon me, and ye shall know and pray unto me, and I will hearken unto you. And I remember laying in the middle of that bathroom floor, and I remember saying, God, you've done it again. You have spared my life, and I don't understand why. Well, a few days after that, I met my second husband. And he was nothing at all, nothing like my first one. I used to tease him. I used to say, God sent an angel. He took the devil away. And we would laugh over it. But, you know, it was hard because I didn't know what it was to be safe and protected. I didn't know that feeling. Had never really known it other than my grandmama or my mama trying to hide us when we were little, when we were scared. I didn't know what safety and what just being able to be calm and to be all this. You know, I'm like, what? I'm thinking, okay, I'm not used to this. I'm used to fear. I'm used to rejection. I'm used to all of these things. Because in the process of me leaving my first husband, my church rejected me. We don't want you. You're not good enough. Pretty much told that to my face. And it did something to me. It made me not want to go to church. It made me, I still love God, but I didn't want to go to church. But I made myself go. I went to a different church, but things were never the same. So when I met my second husband, we got married about 2 years later, and